For a while there, I thought we were living in Oregon with all the rain we've had. We have a nice, beautiful sunny day today, so it's a good day for sealing up some panels. I'm going to cut them and prepare them and show you exactly how I prepare my panels for painting. Hopefully everything will be simple and you can follow right along. So I'll get right to it. All right, so here's the equipment that you're going to need. This is a smooth roller, and I get the 6-inch roller for that. 150 grit sandpaper and a palm sander. If you don't have a palm sander, you can do it by hand. It's just, this is a lot quicker. I get a 5-pack of these. That way I can just take this off and throw it away. I don't have to use solvents to try to clean this stuff off. This is a bin primer. It's shellac base. I know there's some controversy around that, and I'm not going to go into that with this video because that would be long and tedious. So I'll make sure that that's all in the notes so you can do the research if you want to. But it dries in 45 minutes. Everyone has little things that they do to their panels. I'll teach you what I do, and you can kind of tweak it and figure things out for yourself as you go along. This is the wood that I make the panels out of. It's MDF, or probably in this case HDF. It's not listed as HDF because nobody knows what HDF is. The manufacturers pretty much label everything MDF nowadays, but they're about the same thing, just that HDF is a little bit less dense. I use the 1/8-inch panels for anything 18 by 24 and smaller, and I use 1/4-inch panels for anything larger than that. I get the 2 by 4 foot sheets, and if you see warping in it when they're in the hardware store, don't buy that stuff. Go somewhere else and look for some better stuff than that, because it means that the manufacturing wasn't done well. The stuff that I buy is pretty much straight on, no warping or cupping or anything before I use it. I've been using this for over 20 years. I've been using panels for over 20 years. I've been using MDF, boy, I think for at least 15 years now, and I haven't had any negative repercussions from it. So let's get to cutting these and priming them and go from there. Yes, these are sitting on our trampoline. Our children are just going to have to wait. And it's probably a little bit darker than just a few minutes ago. My beautiful sunny day that I thought was going to be perfect is now turning into rain clouds. So I hope I have enough time to finish this all off. And here's my little saw. It's a DeWalt, and it is extremely accurate. I looked at a lot of different saws. I didn't like the cost of it, over $300, but it was well worth it. You can adjust this right here. This little guy, you just pull this lever and I can adjust it to the nth degree here. This is so incredibly accurate and it locks down perfectly. So I can't recommend this saw enough. And this is what I used as well to build my new pallet. Okay, here we go. All right, so here we go. Just doing our panel here, and didn't get quite enough on there. So just quickly cover it, and then I'm going to go different directions with it. So this will be the first coat, then we'll do a second coat in about an hour after this first coat dries. So then I just lightly go, I don't want any overlap lines, creating ridges that I don't like. So I'll go straight this and try to take out softly my overlap lines. Okay, so that looks pretty good like that. And we'll leave that, and in an hour, come back. All right, here goes the second coat. Quickly get it moved around on here. Then I will do the same thing that we did before, but only in the opposite direction this time. All right, that should do it. And then we'll get to sanding it. This Zinsser bin primer is very fluid and it levels out so smoothly there really isn't much in the way of sanding that needs to be done. So in the video you'll notice that I do a very quick sanding, although on a regular basis I won't need to sand at all. With my hand there, I'm just showing you the powder that's left over just to kind of emphasize how little I sanded. You're not going to have to do much to these panels after you've primed them. It really depends on your personal preference and what kind of a surface you're going for, what you want to work on. I used this board that I'm sanding right now to experiment. I wanted to show what kind of texture is possible with just the bin primer by itself. So I used my palette knife, an old house painting brush, and the roller. With the palette knife, I continued working it around the board as the primer dried, so it wouldn't just level out and smooth out the texture. I did the same thing with the brush and the roller. I worked with it as it got drier and drier so that that texture would stay there, so there would actually be something there to use. Now I'll show you some simple textures with the palette knife, the brush, and the roller using acrylic gesso instead of the bin primer. When it comes to textures, there's so many things you can do. I'm just going to show you a few, but take what you learn here and then use your imagination. When I was in printmaking, that was my minor for my MFA. To create textures for my prints, I used all kinds of different materials and tools. Carpet, the bottom of my shoe, whatever might have some fun, unique texture to it. If I saw a texture, I used it. If I saw something that I thought, wow, I think that would look pretty cool, then I figured out how to use that texture in whatever it was that I was trying to achieve, whether it was a painting or my prints. So after you see the textures that I do, then you can take those textures and play with them. See what interesting things you can come up with on your own. So right here, I'm using my palette knife to create some smooth, broad swaths. If you watch how I kind of move around the panel a lot, it's because I don't want any kind of recognizable pattern. I want it to be asymmetrical. I don't want to see one spot looking like another, parallel lines, or shapes that look like a bust of Beethoven. Anything that might stand out more than another, I don't want that in there. Texture is meant to be a supporting foundation, not the end result. So with my knife or brush, I constantly shift directions, change up the pressure, overlap, whatever it takes to make it look random and to break up lines or shapes that demand attention. Remember, your imagination is your greatest tool. Use it. This isn't about some trite trick that we might use to do some commercial work. Yes, texture can greatly speed up the painting process, especially with landscape painting. But when we use it correctly, it can also greatly enhance the strength of the painting and save us some unnecessary steps along the way. Texture is all about making our paintings more interesting and visually appealing. Something that our viewers are going to want to keep coming back to over and over again. So don't think of this as a trick. Think of this as an extension of what you're already doing when you paint. You're using your brushes, your palette knives, paper towels. Those are tools that you use, and that's all they are. They're tools. There isn't one way to use your brush or your palette knife. Every artist is different. It's the same thing with textures. There isn't any one way to create or use a texture. All you want to make sure of is that it doesn't detract from the overall strength of your painting or the subject matter. It should support and emphasize whatever it is you're trying to say in your work. Notice that in this last scene, I'm putting all three of the textures together. I'm using the palette knife, the brush, and the roller in combination. We can create a real rough texture and then smooth out parts of it. We can texture separate parts of the panel with different looks. Whatever will make our work stronger and our jobs as artists easier, that's the name of the game. So experiment. See what works for you. You don't have to do a texture on every panel. Many of the panels I use won't have any texture at all, or they'll have a very subtle one. I love how fast the Zinsser is to use, that it doesn't require any extra manipulation on my part, that it dries so quickly. I can get done so much faster than I used to when I was using oil primer or the acrylic gesso. It's relatively smooth and without any discernible texture, and that's all right. If I determine ahead of time that a particular scene that I'll be painting, either on location or here in the studio, would benefit from some type of texture, I can add that to my panel the day before. It will save us a lot of time if we simply add texture to a panel when we need it. If we find that we like a particular texture repeatedly, we can assembly line it, do up a batch of them, and keep a supply handy. But it's better if we don't come to fill dependent on a one-size-fits-all mindset or look. Our brushes and other tools can also create those textures that we like with the paint itself. Texture can be a fantastic tool, but it can also weaken painting. Painting is a thinking game, not a formula. So let your brain get some exercise each time you paint, and don't fall for easy. Painting is never easy, but it is fun and it's incredibly rewarding. This is the experiment with the bin primer. I didn't touch the right side, it's just the primer as it dried normally. And I used a palette knife to texture the left side. The texture from the palette knife was pretty thin and subtle, and took some time to finish, so it might not be worth all the effort. But if it's a subtle texture we're going for, it could come in handy, and it's nice to know about. I ended up wiping off the paint wash on the right side completely, and then I tried out the brush to see what that might do for us. Again, it's subtle, but I think it has some definite possibilities for future paintings. Enough bristle texture to add some interest without overwhelming whatever we put on top. And the brush bristle texture complements very naturally with the brush painting, as opposed, of course, to a palette knife painting or something else. Remember though, I didn't just apply it quickly and leave it. I continued working it with a brush as it dried, which is pretty quickly, to ensure that the texture didn't flatten and level out. So it does require some time and work to make it successful, but I think it's worth it. The brush texture with the acrylic gesso is much easier to achieve. The two main drawbacks are, of course, number one, the slight possibility that the mechanical bond between the acrylic and the oil might fail, and your oil paint will peel off. And number two, the acrylic gesso tends to be a bit more absorbent, so the initial wash doesn't always wipe off completely when you want to get back to the white of the panel. I haven't had much trouble with the second one. A little Gamsol on a paper towel seems to work wonders. And in more than 20 years, I've never had oil paint peel or fall off an acrylic ground. So if you want a more apparent texture, I'd recommend using the acrylic gesso on top of the Zinsser primer. That Zinsser is just so easy to use for that first coat. I haven't yet tried it, but the Liquitex Super Heavy Gesso had great reviews. And it sounds like it might be one of the better options for experimenting and manipulating the surface of our panels. Give it a try, see what it does for you. Here is a side-by-side comparison of the acrylic on the left and the Zinsser on the right. Tough to tell from a video, I'm sorry, but it does give you a place to start at least. And I've included a few examples here of how I've used these textures in my own professional work. This first painting of hollyhocks is 30 by 24 inches. You can see that the brush texture is pretty heavy. Most of that came from the acrylic gesso, especially in those background areas, the hills and the grasses. The texture in the flowers and leaves, that was primarily from the thick paint that I used, that I applied to the painting. Yet, if you look close, you'll see how that primer texture, even with the leaves and flowers, helped to soften edges and create a more integrated feeling between the background and the hollyhock plants. And that's really what it's all about, is helping all the parts of the painting to come together, to feel like they belong with each other, to make it feel more natural, as if we're really looking out of a window, even if it is a little bit of an impressionist window. This next painting, titled River Music, was a 30 by 40 commission piece that I did. I applied the acrylic gesso with the smooth roller, just like I did with the other paintings. But with the thicker gesso, it ends up leaving a very tiny dot-like or quilted pattern that I generally didn't think I liked, so I'd sand it down. This time, I decided to leave it and see what it would do to the painting. It was a rougher, less fluid surface than I normally like, and I had to work at it quite a bit more to get my washes and the initial paint application on the panel. But the end result was surprising. The texture gave the painting a very soft look, kind of like velvet. I wasn't sure at first if I liked it, but my wife loved it. And ends up, so did the family that commissioned the piece. So I decided to try it out again on another 30 by 40, Colors of the Wind, that I did for the Indiana Heritage Arts Show. It ended up winning an award of excellence. So I guess that texture worked out all right after all. Sometimes I think we get so used to a certain look that everything else somehow seems wrong, not as legitimate or something. Kind of like some of the plein air movement that I've seen in the country. For some reason, a lot of plein air painters start to believe that all plein air work should have some kind of certain look or follow some particular guidelines. And that's just not true. Plein air work, it's not about some particular look. It's about being out in nature and really feeling our subject. Seeing all the subtle nuances and the shifts in color and light and shadow and reflection. Everything else, how all the colors affect one another. How the different conditions of weather affect color temperatures and color relationships. It's about getting in tune with our subject, knowing it intimately, so that that knowledge and understanding reflects in our work. There's no limitations on what our paintings have to look like, or any guidelines that determine how we paint, or how we express ourselves, or how we express our feelings about what we're seeing. That is completely personal and subjective in nature. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking that you have to follow some obscure idea about what plein air work is all about. Plein air just means being outdoors, and that is it. Will you do me a favor? Do everything that you can to keep yourself open-minded and wide-eyed. We want to be ready for those moments when something new and wonderful comes to us that ultimately takes our art and ourselves to incredible heights. Expect more. Don't follow what everyone else is doing. Learn from the best that you can learn from, and then take that and do something even better with it. Go beyond what I've done or what anyone else has done. Follow your own muse, follow your own instincts, your own inspiration, and do something incredible with it, and have a lot of fun all along the way.